Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon. I'm your cartoonist pal Stan, and I'm here to have a conversation with a fun person who has worked on the game Dungeons and Dragons and the tabletop role playing game in general. This still being the 50th anniversary, as my guest was pointing out in the pre show. Until we have a monster manual, we haven't completed this. We haven't completed uh, anniversary is the word I'm looking for. So yeah, we're still going. It's 2025, but the show rolls on. We haven't done all 50 years yet, and there's still lots of fun people for me to talk to. And segueing out of that, I'm going to say my guest this week is someone I first met when he was working on the RPGA. RPGA has come up a fair amount recently, and throughout the show, I find it fascinating to talk to folks who worked on it, just because it was such an integral piece of the puzzle for so long, and now is gone. If you were not aware of the RPGA, if you were not playing in those days, you don't really you don't get it, right? You can't understand what that organization was. It descriptions kind of don't cut it. So I really like talking to people who were working on it. My guest, who I've now not named three times, is Stephen Radney-MacFarland, who you may know from that time in the RPGA, or from his time as a senior designer at Paizo, or just for being a hell of a nice guy to hang out with at conventions, which he has done a lot in his day. And I'm glad that he agreed to come on and have a chat with me. And I hope that you get something fun out of this conversation. So I'm going to bring him on now. It is Stephen Radney-MacFarland. Hey, Steve, thank you
Hey.
for coming on.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. Like I was telling you before we came on, it's always a pleasure to hang out with you, Stan. And now I get to watch you draw a bit. We can chat about the good old days and the days to come. May they be good. We will see.
Good, bad, or indifferent, they're coming.
Right. Can't stop. It's a locomotive.
Hey, Michael Pastor, thank you for joining us. Happy New Year.
Hey, Michael.
Um, this we're the 8th, but last week's show was pre-recorded, so this is my first live show in 2025
Oh,
for
yes.
this program. Anyway, um,
I feel honored.
yeah, I can't believe I'm still here. It's about this. Actually, this is 1 year since I came up with the idea for the show. It's one of those things that I came up with. I was like, I needed to have thought of this in November. Right.
Right. But better late than never.
Right. No, it
And
worked out fine, but it was a scramble
the
in
Monster Manual's not
January.
out yet. So it worked out.
Yeah, you can do what you can do. Oh goodness, gonna turn that off.
On the on the
Uh,
WotC calendar, it's still 2024.
in in some worlds, it's still 1978. It depends
Yeah.
on who you're talking
Oh, those heady days.
to. Stephen, first of all, happy New Year to you.
Happy New
Good to
Year.
see you. You're one of those folks that all the ways I used to interact with you just stopped happening, right? The convent. I stopped going to conventions. I think you stopped going to a lot of the ones. Uh, the the people that used to come into town where we would get together and hang out, that
Right.
hasn't happened in a number of years. And I used to occasionally pop into Paizo to see folks, but now no one's in that office anywhere, and you don't work there anymore.
Right. I don't
So
work there.
um,
So why bother going?
I know. Well, I don't. Um, so how do you introduce yourself, as in what you do? Are you just like, I'm a game designer? What's
Yeah.
the elevator pitch on Stephen Radney McFarland?
Well, of course, it's there's it's always a matter of the audience, right? It's
Yeah.
all like, oh, I design games. Oh, so you program? It's all like, no, no, no. But my program language is English and drawing, right? It's and so yeah, I
Mark
tell
Atkinson,
people
yes,
that
this is live. Just not to interrupt you, but I don't want them to think we're not seeing them. Yes, go ahead.
oh yeah, and so and it's Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, well, I used to work for that. I work on games that are very similar. Um, and so it's a lot of writing, it's a lot of sketching, usually to give to much better artists so they can make it look prettier. But I still do cartography for Paizo on a freelance basis for the flip map projects, which are always fun to do. I just turned in one earlier this week. And now since I left Paizo at the end of 2019, I've been basically a freelancer. So I've ended up working for a lot of companies. Some of them have been quite controversial, others not so much. And so for instance, the Gloomhaven role playing game is going to come
Mm-hmm.
out at some point in the near future. I was a consultant for that one, at least on early iterations, trying to get that to translate that board game that is quite robust into
Right.
something that role players can grapple with while sort of leaning into the reasons why people really like that game. I do a lot of stuff for people's Kickstarters. I still work for Paizo. I work on my own game. I'm currently working on a mix of a miniatures and board game ish sort of dungeon crawly kind of thing for another publisher. And then I do consulting. Somebody wants to know, like, what the hell is this business? What does it look like? Or how do I fix this current thing that I've started on that I don't do? People will call me up and I'll try to walk them through that. So, and then in my copious free time, I work on my own role playing game called Delve RPG, which I'm very hoping to. The plan is to get it at least the first product out this year. Now complicated a little bit by the fact that I'm going to be moving later in the year, and of course, moves are hell. But I'm hoping that won't slow me down too much because I'm very excited about this game. I just came back, in November, came back from GameholeCon, ran it for a bunch of people there. People really seem to dig it, which of course that's what I want to do. It's sort of my meditation on D20 based role playing games. The things that I like about it and throwing out the things that I don't like about it and creating like a fast paced action and tactical based system.
Well, I think probably toward later in the conversation, I'd like to delve into that a little deeper, hear about.
No pun intended.
Yeah, but let's start with how you got into gaming. How did what we call hobby gaming? How did that come into your life?
Well, I think I was like many young people of my generation. I was sort of primed for it as a kid. As a very young kid, I loved dinosaurs, right? That's a huge stereotype. And I could name every single dinosaurs, but I wouldn't sit still for like spelling lessons, right? Which aggravated my teachers to no end. And then, I got early episodes of Creepy Magazine and was just, early Frank Frazetta stuff. I had a kind of a hippie music teacher who ended up teaching us weird things like the theme song to MASH. Imagine a whole bunch of fourth graders singing the theme song to MASH. And decided about the time that the early Hobbit cartoon was hitting sort of prime time TV, decided to do The Hobbit as a school play, in which I was an eagle and was one of the eagles that carried off the hobbits. Not a major role in that. I've never claimed to be an actor, but and then I moved to California. My father was
where were you when you had this hippie teacher and you were in the Hobbit play?
I was in the D.C. area.
Okay.
I grew up. I was born in Washington D.C. Grew up I grew up in a lot of places, but my elementary school was all in this place in Southern Maryland, not far from DC, and a lot of crawling through woods, catching crayfish, doing kind of Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn sort of crap. And then I moved to California in the Bay Area, and pretty soon after we moved there, I went to a birthday party, and I was just expecting, typical birthday party shenanigans. And somebody ended up giving me a character sheet of one of the henchmen, one of the little NPC character sheets for AD&D, and I ended up playing this game that I had no idea what I was doing. We were playing against the giants, the Steading of the Hill Giant Chief. Went home and immediately cannibalized all of the various games I had at home to try to recreate some aspect of what I had just experienced. And so Battleship Plastic Pieces became my first GM screen. I took all of the Yahtzee dice and Monopoly dice I could get my hands on, and then inflicted this early game design on my neighbors until I was able to get the actual rules for the game. And being rather a young tyke, then delving into Gygaxian prose was a huge challenge, and so. I kept on.
What did you start with? What version was that?
It was AD&D, the first edition AD&D. The first actual product I got, which probably says a lot about how I designed dungeons in some ways, was Tomb of Horrors, the duotone adventure
Right.
without the illustrations, right? And so I'm like reading the stuff without the illustrations, trying to describe it.
So you didn't have like the red. This is one of the ones with the red glasses, right?
No, this is just a very early edition where it didn't have a full color cover. It was just the pink and black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had none of the illustrations. So I'm just going off on the prose and trying to run this adventure, and then everybody's dying. And I said, well, Gary says it's a thinking person's adventure. You're just not thinking, right? Coach is sort of young man, sort of not knowing the whole extent of people gnashing their teeth at this adventure. College students like that guy. We have to save the game from him. Wow, times don't change, and and stuff like that, and then. Of course, getting rule books eventually and delving into it, but and becoming a GM, mostly a GM for most of my life, which really helped me a lot because we ended up moving around a bit due to my father's job, and so anywhere that I moved, all I had to do was say hit points and armor class, and somebody perked their head up, and all of a sudden I had instant friends. And a gaming group to do. So it was. It came into my life at just the right time, and I caught the bug, and it's just never let go. And it really helped me as a young person because, quite frankly, I think I just saw the world as kind of tedious and boring. It's just. And then all of a sudden I figured out all of these subjects that I really didn't want to pay attention in school because I didn't understand the context. I could use all of those things to create better games.
Yeah.
And, and then my reading went off the hook, and all of a sudden I was kind of a mid to poor student. And the next thing I know, I'm in all of the higher classes because it generated this thirst for knowledge just because nearly everything I learned I could throw sometimes awkwardly into this game, and entertain friends over the weekend. One of my favorite stories is my father, who, he was a cop and he was a manly man, and and everything else, and he didn't understand this sort of artistic, dreamy, kid that he had. He this friend told me years later, he goes, we were leaving your game one Sunday because we'd usually play on Sunday because, gaming's like church. And And my father, he goes, "Why do you guys keep on coming back every Sunday to play this game with Steven?" And they go, "Because your son is a devious son of a bitch. He's just he's just evil, and we can never like. We're still trying to figure out how to beat him." And so, which it's D&D. They were always going to win, but I wasn't going to
Right,
make it easy.
right.
Yeah.
So Michael Pastor asked, "What kind of store did you get your first books in? Where were you able to buy your first books?"
My very first books, I actually got them on the school playground through somebody had an older brother who was like, "Yeah, you bring me $2 and I'll give you this book." Then I found out that there was
Yard
this
deal
hobby.
here.
Yeah, it's all like, "Hey kid, you want a Tomb of Horrors? $2, right?" I thought the first one was free. Shut up, give me the $2. But and then I found out there it was the San Francisco area, and I lived in the Concord area for a little bit in the Roanoke Park area, and it was kind of like getting the dice was extremely difficult at
Yeah,
that point in time
yeah,
in the 80s. And and it's I remember working at WotC years later. We were talking about basic sets, and they were wondering why basic sets don't sell as much as they did in the past. And I'm like, because you can get dice everywhere now. Like a lot of times we bought the basic set because that was the easiest way to get the dice, and you got an adventure with it too. But
right.
we were mostly playing AD&D. That doesn't go for everybody. That was my own particular group. But yeah, it was almost like trying to find a head shop, back in the day and then Sears picked it up all of a sudden,
Right.
uh,
Yes.
and it was and it sort of got this kind of weird mainstream where you could order it from J.C. Penney's, and then that got better. But by then we had all that stuff. We were looking for like the newer stuff that TSR wasn't throwing it into like weird 3-pack shrink
Right.
bags and throwing it at mainstream stores. And then I moved to New York City.
Wow. All right. Hold on. Before you go, I'm going to switch over. I'm going to start doing some drawing while we chat. Um, Today's subject is the Guildmasters Guide to Ravnica. Um, I'm getting some. We're at 2018 here in my one image a year. It's also in
Right.
the midst of those years when they were putting out very few products. So
Yeah.
it's been a real challenge, more of a challenge to find images. I think, yeah, this will be a good image to represent the year. But no matter what, this one, right, the first big hardcover that crossed over Magic and
Which was
D&D after all
shocking at
that
the time,
time.
because there were so many meetings that I was in at Wizards of the Coast where we would talk about a Magic D&D crossover, and especially the Magic team was like, "Don't cross the streams."
Yeah, no, the Magic team killed at least four different versions of that before it and it wound up happening because James Wyatt was over on the Magic team,
Yeah.
and so he did the series of articles for Magic that took the whatever sets they were working on, and he did articles based on it, and they were very popular. And the enough change had happened in the Magic team that they could look at that and realize, oh wait, no, this is actually good. Everyone likes this.
Right.
And then there was enough changeover at the shop overall that it finally happened. And I'm glad James was the one that got to do so much of it. But
Yeah.
man, yeah, I know you were involved in some of those earlier ones, and I was too, and it just killed me. The Magic team just wouldn't let it happen.
Well, and then at least certain members of the Magic team, some of whom are still really good friends of mine, then they would come in and tell us, "Well, you really need to have a player versus player version of D&D." And I'd be all like,
Right?
"No, the math doesn't work like that, right? You'd have to totally like the underlying math of the game assumes that it's a party of adventurers that are gonna win.
Yeah, that's what
Like,
the game is about. The game.
yeah, it's a cooperative game. I know you guys love these competitive games, but D&D is a nice cooperative game that has sort of the semblance of a competitive, if you're that type of GM, that you like to sort of tease your players and back and forth. But that's not really how it works. And then yeah, so but that was definitely a symptom of that time at Wizards. But anyway, to go back to, then I moved to New York, Staten Island, New York, because my father got a job out there. And then I came across this wonderful store called the Fantastic Store that sold comic books, role playing games, miniatures, adventure games, and pulp fiction. Like the
Staten
old
Island.
pulps. Yeah, and
Wow.
and then later on they got like one of the first gauntlet machines that we put, I don't know how much money into. And so I was in heaven at that point, right? If I got bored, I just went up to the Fantastic Store and just looked at what was on the shelves. And I wasn't even a big comic book guy back then, but they gave, like, the guy behind the counter, he kept on trying to get me to buy comics and I just wasn't biting. And then he gave me the first issue of The Watchmen and said, "Here, just take this home." And then I went and came back for the second issue. Well, that doesn't come out till next month, Stephen. And that was one of the longest years of my childhood, is waiting for issue of The Watchmen.
That was a tough one. And,
but yeah, it was really difficult to find stuff.
you know what? I didn't know that you had lived in the New York metro area.
Oh yeah,
That's where I grew up.
Oh yeah, I think, I don't know if maybe I didn't know that, but yeah, I lived there basically all of junior high school and my first year of high school, and then I moved back to that same place in Southern Maryland that I went to elementary school with, and I was horrified. There was dead possums on the road, like farmland. The only game store in the area was just a small selection of gaming stuff in a video rental store. I actually met Jefferson Dunlap, who's pre-pass manager of Wizards of the Coast, in that store.
Yeah?
Yeah, he just came in looking, because he had just moved to the area. He had just graduated from the Art Institute, was working on a publication out there. And we hit it off, and then went our own separate ways and didn't see each other for years later until a WotC all hands meeting. And then we're all like, "Jeff, Stephen, what?"
You recognize it? Yeah, you recognize each other. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, as I like to tell him, he's my oldest friend in more ways than one.
All right. So, how then did you? What did you say? You went from being a poor student to being a mediocre student. What did you do? Did you do college? Did you do?
Oh yeah. Well, I had a problem with college in the fact that my father,
college.
yeah, my father had these rules, which were, you're 18 and you're out. Which later on, my mom was like, "We could have been a little softer on that," and I was like, "Meh." And I was ready to be out of my house when I was 18. And you pay for your own college. And he suggested that I join the multiple times that I joined the Marine Corps. Anybody who knows me personally would know that doesn't mix. I have a huge problem with authority.
Really?
Like, massive. And so what I ended up doing is basically, working restaurant jobs for little pay, mostly as a grill chef, and then waiting until I could declare sort of my emancipation from my parents' financial records, so I could finally get the kind of financial aid I needed to go to school. And then I went to college in Colorado and studied history and philosophy, and a bit of anthropology. And I was like the news editor at the paper and the graphics editor for the literary magazine and stuff like that. So I was already into publication and periodicals, and then and I was a political cartoonist for that paper. Um, both
No,
both
let me find these things out about my friends that I never knew.
yeah. I won awards for both my political cartoons and my columns when I was in college. I
Sweet.
still have some of them there. Yeah, it's I wouldn't say I hadn't read Hunter S. Thompson yet, so it wasn't full Gonzo, but it had some Gonzo qualities. And I got in trouble a few times for political cartoons, and then people would come and you shouldn't think those things, and I would tell them to f right off, and then they get mad, which is kind of a motif in my life. So I'm not too worried about that.
Well, you know what? I'm torn between the, well, screw them. You shouldn't think those things, and thinking, yeah, well, that's exactly the way to get Steven to double down on anything.
Oh yeah. So and then of course, like many college students, I I worked multiple jobs. In the evenings, I worked at Kinko's, now FedEx. Kinko's was very good to me because after I graduated, they moved me out to the Seattle area
Oh,
to open up. Yeah, Third and Marion, which was a big. It was the .com boom was going. It was their big thing. I saw a lot of crazy things during the .com boom. Amazon was my client. A lot of, Ernst and Young was my like. There was just crazy things going on in the Seattle area at the time, and of course, I'd been also during my college days really active in the RPGA out there, and then I eventually ended up just looking for a gaming group and using the RPGA to do that. Ended up meeting Jeff Quick.
okay. So you say that's kind of a, a
Because you got Jeff
odd
on.
little segue. But of course, you were with the so how did you? Was there an RPGA group on campus, or were you going to conventions, or what was the?
So just before I started going to college and I was living in Denver, I had this really tight D&D group. And we decided to go to, it had to be like a Genghis Khan or a Tacticon.
Hmm.
And they had an RPGA team event, and which back then you would get judged and there'd be a winner.
Right.
And we came in as a team and we just crushed it. And we did it like for 3 conventions in a row. Just because, I had honed these guys into a well-oiled machine. It was a really smart group of guys. One of the guys in it, Dylan, was one of those fellas who graduated with a, PhD when he was 17. It's a very sort of
Right.
Sheldon Cooper kind of person, although I think much more charming than Sheldon is. He had
Well, that doesn't take much. But
very
yeah.
very infectious personality. Loved to laugh, and and then at about that time, Living City kind of made its debut in the convention scene in Colorado, and we all made Living City characters, and so I pretty much started the RPGA a little bit before college and all through college, playing various events. I figured out very quickly that the way that the RPGA was, especially at that time, was it really was a popularity contest. If you could make a character, if you could make your table laugh
Right.
and entertain them, it was this ranking system where everybody sort of ranked you, and then the highest person at the table won a certificate, and the highest person in the whole con for that event won a trophy. And I've got like, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 trophies, just because I was able to use my humor to make people
Right.
laugh. And I'd always make sure to add a Call of Cthulhu in there because you could have a great time role playing that you were going insane, and and delight folks with that madness,
Quite
and
literally.
then yeah, quite literally. And so, and I really liked the people who I met. There's some really inspiring folks that I met during that time. There's Robin and Cheryl Llewellyn. They were absolutely great. Ken Rickard, which ran a lot of the shows out there and ran the show called BenCon, which was an all charity event. And and Ken was a very open gay man who just didn't care what you thought of him, and just the sweetest, most uplifting person in the world. Right. Everything that I learned about running good events has a backbone in what Ken taught me about it.
Mm.
And so that was kind of not only the RPGA as an organization, but how to run events really well, how to motivate people, remembering that this isn't about your ego, it's about people coming to your events and having a great time.
Right.
And not everybody could not everybody could be as outgoing and just as positive as Ken could be, but you could always make sure that everybody around you was having a fantastic time. Without that sort of force of personality, just by being, somebody in the background who was constantly making sure, simple things. There enough trash cans? Are lines moving really well?
Right.
Uh, the the fella who runs Gamehole Con, he's really big on making sure that there are no lines, and it's one of the smoothest run shows
Yeah.
that I've been to. So
It is. Yeah. I just went this year for the first time. I wasn't a guest. I was Ed Stark brought me as his plus one, and I had a great time. I'm hoping that I can make the cut and be a guest, run some stuff there, and go back again.
yeah.
Great show. Great show.
So the RPGA kind of taught me about sort of larger connections within the gaming community,
Mm-hmm.
and
Okay.
then when I moved out to Seattle, they had this thing called the Seattle Mob, which was a club out there, which was a mix of just folks in the area and folks from WotC. And I immediately joined those message boards just to kind of get a group together, figure out where people were gaming.
So
And
it's
that's when I
interesting. The
met.
Seattle Mob came about because when Wizards moved out, there wasn't a strong RPGA presence, and
Right.
when the TSR folks moved out to Wizards, there wasn't a
Yeah.
strong RPGA presence in Seattle, and the folks coming from Wisconsin wanted to get away to get kind of plugged into the area, and so the RPGA uh, thought, let's make this thing, and it can be the local thing, and it can be the place that the Wizards team can go to interact, and it was,
Yeah.
not everyone loved that idea, but enough people did that it became like the company's show pony. Right? It's like everyone. Well, that's actually a bad phrase. It became like the place that we went to play with real people.
Right. Wait. When we got to see the plebes,
Yeah,
but
yeah. No, that sounds terrible, and no one thought that way. But
no, nobody really thought that way. It was funny when for a long time it seemed like at Wizards it was like, oh, somebody's got to run a game for people that aren't in the building. Who do we get? And it's like, oh, get Steven. And I don't know what happened at TSR in the Lake Geneva days, but there seemed to be this actual fear of running games for the public. And I remember asking somebody, I don't remember who it is. I want to say it was Skip Williams, but this doesn't sound like Skip at all. So I don't think it. because Skip was actually pretty good at doing that. But I'm like,
And
why
Skip came out of the RPGA from its
yeah,
early.
why are you so nervous about this? It's like, what if I get a rule wrong? And it's all like, who cares? Make fun. You're gonna get rules wrong. You're gonna mess them up. You're gonna forget something, especially in a game that's as complicated as either second edition D&D or third edition D&D.
Right.
Somebody's gonna correct you, and then you just say, "Oh yeah, you're right." Then, you know, and if the change is very easy to make, then make the change. If not, it's like, we'll do that. You're right. We'll do that next time. Sorry. And nobody's going to care, right? And nobody expects you to be an encyclopedia. Well, there might be some people, some fans out there that do expect you to be an encyclopedia, but just ignore those fans because that's unreasonable. And and the real big goal is people are going to be thrilled just that they got to share a game with you. And don't sweat the small stuff. Don't sweat those kind of details.
Yeah, well, there's, you know what? I think that there was a long time where that whole um, thought process that you were just describing, the everything has to be right, everything has to be 100% right,
Yeah.
um, was played around, and it came into. I think that was one of the problems of that made that haunted third edition because of the complexity and that idea that even our products had to be 100% right. There was a small, maybe not even that small, but an unsuccessful push from within the department at the launch of third edition to make it to set expectations of if you're within 5 or 10% of correct, that's good enough. Keep going. And
Yeah.
the instead it was no, we've got to make sure we do everything correct. Our stuff has to be 100% on, and because that's a message we sent, everyone thought they had to be 100% on, and we poisoned the. I'm overstating here, but that became a process throughout fandom, and we did it to ourselves.
Yeah, monster stat blocks and that crazy
Oh my god!
InDesign or the spreadsheet, the Excel spreadsheet that we had to work on
Yeah,
those, which was yeah, that was a big thing. And then if something was, if you forgot a synergy bonus or if you shaved it off, it's really funny because people don't understand, especially with published material, is you can do a stat block correctly, but then it's going to get laid out and flowed on a page. And then somebody's going to be all like, well, we need to lose X number of words.
right.
And then so you end up trimming that stuff out because, or whatever. It's like there's so many competing desires for perfect in there that, it sort of did breed a group of people, especially with stat blocks. Well, let me tell you how many stat blocks in this monster manual were wrong. And yeah, a lot of them, and it's one of later on when we started working on fourth edition and trying to learn the lessons of third edition, which we were successful and not successful in other ways. And even when I came over to Paizo to work on Pathfinder and design Pathfinder second edition, and I think people are going to be a little, well, they're already a little shocked that the 2024 fifth edition monster manual, whew, what a mouthful. There's going to be some drastic changes to monsters because monsters live by different rules, right?
Right.
The third edition thing that it all springs up from the same mathematical model was interesting, but it doesn't really serve gameplay well. It serves, this kind of weird simulationist desire that, we've created the unified field theory of role-playing games.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that may be very pleasing for math junkies, but your real goal is to make very pleasing events around a table.
Right.
Because if the gameplay is not pleasing, then nobody's going to want to come back. And on the GM side, if you're spending 15 hours to prepare a 4-hour game, whew, you were dedicated and we love you, but that's not really the way it should be.
All right, so you let's just kind of jump back a little bit. So you joined the Seattle Mob.
Yep.
And how did that segue into coming in and working in house?
Well, it started with meeting
Jeff Quick.
Jeff Quick, yeah, thanks. God, why did I space Jeff? I'm getting.
Well, you said him earlier. You said it already.
No, I said it already, and then I'm like, and so and Jeff
Quick,
really,
who was my guest last week? For those
which was your guest last week. And so, yeah, I think I put up a thing on a message board and everything else. So Jeff at the time, Jeff didn't have a car at the time. I had this really beat up Toyota. And so Jeff was like, hey, would you like to go out to dinner and we can talk about stuff? And I didn't know who Jeff was from home. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so I met Jeff, and Jeff explained that he was working in the RPGA area, mostly on the magazines. And I'm like, oh, that's a good gig. I'd like to work on the magazines. And he was all like, funny thing, Steven, is I kind of want to move somewhere else, and they need somebody to work on the magazines. And I'm like, oh, how much does it pay? And then he told me, and I laughed. But I was also like, I was a big enough D&D geek where I was like, oh, that'd be kind of good. And then there are other things where he's like, hey, are you going to the, that's when we had that big game store, the game center in the university district, and the mob ran game days there. Are you going to go to that? Yeah. Hey, do you think you could drive me? Because I don't have a car. And I'm like, yeah. And so there was, not only did Jeff get kind of a sense of the person that I was at, but I would also drive him to events that he couldn't get to. And then I ended up applying for that job. And there was a period of time, did I have one interview? I don't remember. And then it got really slowed down all of a sudden. And I was like, that's weird. And it was almost like, I think, the word was, they're going to hire you. And I was like, oh, well, now I got to figure out whether I actually want to do this or not. And then I didn't hear anything from them forever. And I was busy at my own job. And it really didn't think of it that much. And I knew at that point, I'd heard through the grapevine that 3rd edition was being play tested. And I'd moved there I couldn't get into the play test.
Right.
Because I was too late. And I heard the rumblings of Living Greyhawk and everything else. And then they hired Eric Mona. And I knew Eric through AOL, TSR Online on AOL. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Right. And so I can see why it slowed down. And now they're going to hire Eric for that position. And I'm like, yeah, that makes total sense, especially with Living Greyhawk coming on the way, because Eric was a huge Greyhawk fan.
Right.
And did some really fantastic fan work on Greyhawk. And I was doing, we had these club newsletters, and me and this other guy, Ted, were doing these really nice newsletters for our local club or local area. And people were like, Steven, you guys create the best looking and some of the best content of these newsletters and of all of these regions. And I was like, well, yeah, I kind of know what I'm doing. And Ted kept me on focus, making sure we were actually talking about important stuff and not, whatever I was musing in my head. But, and then it got to a point where I think the ambition for the RPGA was so much at that period of time that they quickly figured out that Eric needed help. Eric was, in charge of spearheading this campaign and then running now 2 magazines, not just Polyhedron, but Living Greyhawk Journal. And that's when I kind of got the call back and was like, "Hey, do you want to come in and be an editorial assistant in the RPGA?" And then I thought about, and at that time I was making a lot more money than what they were offering me, but I was also like, oh, I should give this a shot. I feel like I can always go back to Kinko's, right? Um, go back to the things that I was doing. Yeah, I can take a pay decrease and go do that. And was in a lot of ways really glad that I did. And then also finding out, so I started in 2000 just at the release of third edition. And that next year was nuts, especially at WotC. Because all of a sudden I see the first round of layoffs at Wizards.
Yeah.
And I'm figuring to myself, I am the new guy. I'm gone. This was interesting. I've learned a lot, blah, 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 blah. But I also remember at that time, there were a lot of people that only seemed to play L5R at work. Like I never saw them do anything else. And all of a sudden, all of those people were gone. And they were like, no, Stephen, we're not getting rid of you. You do too much work. And I was like, okay. And then they moved Eric up to periodicals, and all of a sudden all of Living Greyhawk was dumped in my lap, and realizing how much was promised for Living Greyhawk, and now it's got one person who's putting it together. I had to think really fast and reorganize that thing just to make sure that, because it was getting very popular. People were really digging it.
For the people out there who were not around, what give a quick summation of what Living Greyhawk was.
All right, so the first living campaign that the RPGA did is basically the first MMO, but using Dungeons and Dragons. It's the idea that you just don't go to a convention and get pre-made characters and play in a pre-made dungeon. It's you can play your character and come back and play it over and over again, much like Adventurers League, or like this is the start of all of this. And so Living City was in one city of the Forgotten Realms, Raven's Bluff, and everybody played in the city and whatnot. With Living Greyhawk and the release of third edition, they took the World of Greyhawk map, split it into regions that had geographical locations in not only the United States, but the entire world. So the Duchy of Ernst was like Washington and Oregon, and Onwald was England, and Ekbir was France, and whatnot. And each region would create their own content, and then you would have these core adventures that went on top of it. But in order to play a region's adventure, you had to go to a convention in that region. So you had to come to NorwestCon to play in the Duchy of Ernst adventures.
Right.
You couldn't just play everywhere. And so each region had a triad. That triad was in charge of putting together adventures and then putting it up the publishing process and everything else. This was all done. And I remember kind of figuring this out. I'm like, so the RPGA is basically a marketing arm at Wizards of the Coast. Yes. Yeah. But we use volunteers. Yes.
Yeah.
But we're a publicly traded company that uses volunteers for our marketing. Yes. I don't think you guys have read laws. Right? Like this is not going to last. And it lasted a hell of a lot longer than I thought it was going to do. Now companies do all sorts of, it's a nonprofit that's associated with the company in order to do it after lawsuits happened. But I'm like, and there was at conventions, we were putting 4 people to a room, 4 to 6 people to a 2-bedded hotel room, and not having a whole lot of oversight about who goes in the room. And I'm like, this is a harassment claim just waiting to happen. And there were all these things that I would just bring up in meetings, and everybody would be like, Stephen, don't think about that. And I'm like, you think we should think about this, right? It's these are, like, I'm not doing it to be an ass. I'm doing it because these are huge potential problems that are going to bite us later on.
Right.
You can ignore them, but it's going to make it worse.
Right.
Right.
And I mean, you where you were looking at. I mean, it only takes the one time for it to happen. Like you could, they had years of doing these things and not having those problems. But
Right, right.
you rightly identified that only takes one incident to blow the lid off everything.
Yeah. And so luckily not under my watch. Like so I worked basically I worked for the RPGA in that section. You talk about now that there's no more RPGA. Every year they tried to get me to ditch the RPGA as a brand. Every year they'd be all like, "Well, Stephen, the RPGA, it's just kind of it's not a very good brand." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, why?" Like, I mean, have you seen my play numbers? I think they're working and everything else. Um, and it'd be like basically because the RPGA was in the organized play department, and that organized play department was dominated by Magic, and they kind of didn't know what to do with me.
I mean,
Other than my play numbers were really good, so they kept on.
yeah. The thing that they had, and I don't know you certainly I'm sure you encounter this is Magic as a uh, organized play what generated revenue, right? It wasn't
Yeah,
just a thing,
because they
and
sold cards.
yeah, no, it every event that happened caused it was not just organized play, it was not just promotion, it was sales,
Yeah.
and they wanted to find a way to make RPGA organized play for D&D do the same thing, and it never was going to.
What I would even go as far as saying that I think there were members of that team that just wanted the RPGA to go away.
Yeah.
Like, it's because you've got this weird long haired guy and whatever people that we bring in to help him every so often. And we've got this other guy who's supposed to be his manager, but he's pretty damn clueless.
Yeah.
And they're playing D&D, and anytime that I was like, great, let's make money, let's do this, and they like, no, we don't make money here, Stephen. And I'm like, and I worked there for long enough. I knew exactly how the DCI worked, especially at that period of time. And then they tell me things that I just knew weren't true.
Yeah.
Like I would lose $10,000 from my budget, and then the prize for Magic tournaments that year would go up by $10,000. And I'm like, so you just took $10,000 of my budget, put it. That's not really how budgets work, Stephen.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, enlighten me. Well, there's two buckets. One is you and one is this thing. And we just took this away from you, but it didn't move over here. We just added something over there. And I'm like, now you're just bullshitting me.
Yeah.
And I got so frustrated with it that I quit. There was just like, I had 3 different bosses. They were different levels of cluelessness. I just got sick of it. I'm like, this was kind of fun, but these people are nuts, and I'm just going to quit. And so I wrote up my 2 weeks thing. I sent it, put it on the desk of all 4 of my managers. Like this office space bizarreness that was going on here. The VP of the section, he's like, Stephen, come into my office, and he goes, I got this letter that you sent me. He goes, I'm going to give this back to you until you really think about it. And I'm like, yeah, man, because I don't think. Like, because this isn't a decision that I've been pondering for a while. And this guy used to, he'd always piss me off. But, and so, yeah, I left. I played like World of Warcraft for 6 months, selling an item that I created for the RPGA that paid my bills. Like we made these campaign cards and nobody was buying or selling them. And I was like, are they crap? Are they just too good? What are they? And so I mailed my brother, who's got a different last name than me, like 10 of them. I'm like, just put these up on eBay. I just want to, because they've never been up on eBay. And he put
Right.
it up on eBay, and they went for over $100 a piece. And so I had a ton of these things. Sold that, paid my rent, did whatever the hell I wanted, and then Wizards asked me if I wanted to come back and work in R&D. And I went,
Um,
okay.
the allure, they pull you back.
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop here because I'm at the point. This came together as a sketch pretty quickly. I'm at the point where I need to
Yeah, it
start
did.
inking, and I don't want to start inking. So, as usual, folks who are watching, I will finish this offline. Though I will admit I'm behind. I fell behind in December, and I'm catching up. But I am catching up. And as this finishes, if you want to be the first to see it, you should be subscribed to our free newsletter, our free 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com newsletter. That's where you go. You'll be the first people to see it. All free. There's paid stuff too, but don't worry about that unless you want to. Anyway, uh, uh, let's continue talking for a little bit. I don't know. Do you want to talk about? I'll give it up. Leave it up to you. Do you want to talk about uh, some more of that stuff? Do you want to talk about anything about your Paizo stuff? Do you want to talk about the stuff you're doing now?
I think we could probably, cover a little bit of it. I mean, to sort of give a sort of you know winding thing is so yeah. I left. I came back. I worked in R&D. I basically came back to work on fourth edition D&D,
Hmm.
which was a really fun time. And I'm really proud of that work, and really disappointed that at least when it came out, people just kind of didn't understand it.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it'd be.
and
I think it'd be fun to maybe get you and Rob Hainso, a couple other people together, just do a little uh, roundtable talk about fourth edition. Um, it it's a weird beast. I was one of those people that did not appreciate it only because it wasn't what I wanted. But I always I thought it was a brilliant game. It's just not what I wanted.
right, yeah, and it was one of those things where I'm like, you know, I don't know. Maybe it's because I see the connections between games. Like fifth edition's got a lot of fourth edition in it,
Yeah,
and then people sit there and say that uh, it's D&D is one of the strengths of D&D and role playing games in general is you can just about do whatever the hell you want with it.
right.
And I like very action packed, very tactical. I like role playing too, and all of that kind of stuff. Um, uh, but everybody's like, well, Steven, it's all now theater of the mind, and nobody wants to play these kind of wargamey things. And I'm like, really? Because my Facebook feed is full of people with playmats that I designed, pre-painted miniatures that I did the paint masters for,
Yeah,
playing fifth edition. Yeah. Like, you know, I which the real answer is both aren't wrong. Like some people,
right.
like games. I like bringing out the toys and creating big spectacles of my games. I also like I like miniature war games, especially historical miniature war games. Um, I know there's always been, but it seems a little bit now more so. But maybe I'm just feeling uh, uh, sensitive about it. Like people like, well, we know D&D used to be based on a war game, but those people, right? And I'm like, war games are fun. What are you talking about, kids? But uh, so it's a like there are many things I could point out fourth edition that I thought was the wrong path to go on. Stated my opinion, lost that argument, and it turns out I was right. There's probably just as many I stated my opinion and I was wrong about, right? Not to paint myself as some kind of like I could have saved fourth edition. A very complicated time, but it ends up in the downturn of fourth edition, and they were working on uh, 4.5, the Essentials line, which actually went back to some of the original design that we were working on, which was really funny. And then I got laid off. Heinzo and I got laid off at the same time. the funny thing about that, and I told Rob this story, and he's like, "You're kidding me." Is my wife at the time worked the at the daycare
Mm-hmm.
that was, and somebody had hinted. We knew layoffs were coming, and somebody a day before went and said, "Oh, Sky, I'm so sorry." And so she went home and told me, and she goes, "I think you're getting laid off tomorrow." And I woke up that morning and I'm like, I don't want to deal with it. I'm going to call in sick today. And then the layoffs all happen. And they're like, Steven, we know you're sick today, but you could come to this lunch. And I'm like, so I'm fake coughing at this lunch when I just really didn't want to deal with it that day. And then got late and then came in the next morning and got my papers. Right. It was just like, it's going to be all emotional and stupid and everything else. And I want my own layoff day. And so that's kind of what I did. But and I was skipping out there because I was really frustrated with the direction things were going in, and I was in this one meeting where they were like, "This is what we're going to do," and I stood up and I'm like, "I think that's dumb in these 5 ways," and everybody looked at me like I just shit in their soup, and then when they actually released Essentials, they did 3 of the things that I pointed out. That I was just like, okay, guys, whatever. And then almost immediately, Paizo came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to work freelance on this book that we've got called the Advanced Player's Guide for Pathfinder?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so I did 2 freelance books with them. And then they were like, "Hey, do you want to just come in the office all the time because we really like your work?" And I said, "Yeah." And then I ended up working at Paizo for 9 years after that on Pathfinder and Starfinder. And then I quit that job because I think like 9 years of working for one company is way too much for me. And I ended up, and now I do what I do now, which is work for a bunch of other companies and do my own stuff, and which makes me happier because I don't have to go to meetings.
That is
Or
nice.
I rarely have to go to meetings.
Tell you the one thing I miss about meetings is I got a whole lot of doodling done. I got a lot of cartoons out of meetings.
Like there's nothing better than mostly a great brainstorming meeting, or a great meeting where you get a lot done. But most modern meetings are like, what? Why?
Yeah.
I
had several jobs at Wizards and at Upper Deck, where my job was to go to meetings that were not the good kind. But that was my job. Most of my time was spent going into meetings.
Yeah, that would. I had this. I was on a panel at GameholeCon, and it was ostensibly about 4th edition. And somebody was like, "What advice would you give to somebody?" And I was like, "Never go into management." I said, if you love game design and you like to create, like game companies have a bad habit of then, "Oh, you design really good things. You want to be a manager, make more money," and then people go, "Yeah." And then you go into management, you don't get to create things anymore, and you end up in meetings all the time. And it's all like, well, what's the point? You could have been a manager anywhere.
Yeah.
So, and so I never ever want to be a manager. Yeah.
So what you mentioned that you're working on your own game, and you mentioned that you're hoping that it might come out later this year. What can you tell us about it?
It's called Delve. It's so interestingly enough, if any of you have played Pathfinder Second Edition, there's going to be some things in it that you're going to be all like, "That sounds a lot like Pathfinder Second Edition." We robbed and stole. So somebody asked the question, what's one of the greatest things that I think I've contributed? Pathfinder Second Edition and now Starfinder Second Edition, which I haven't really taken a look at, uses a version of my 3-act economy. It was something I actually, towards the tail end of us developing 4th edition, I was doing a lot of rules archaeology, and I'm like, rounds are just units of time, and we have these sort of weighted rounds and systems as a holdover from miniature war games. When somebody who had initiative, it was a huge sort of advantage, and then people just kind of rolled with that thing. What if an action was an action was an action? You want to attack 3 times, great. You want to move 3 times, great. You want to mix those things up. You actually create a lot of design space. and everything else. And my fellow developers were all, why didn't you think of this like 6 months ago? And I was like, well, because I wasn't, and we use a version of that, and Delve uses a version of that. It also throws out things that I think are just dumb. Experience points. I hate experience points. I don't like numbers that mean other numbers. I like initiative. Is there's nothing that says action by everybody roll some dice, do some quick math, and then we'll tabulate it before the first, like, talk about a terrible, like a system that we're now used to, and everybody's like, but and the person who taught me that there could be a better system than that was Rob Schwalb when he did Shadow of the Demon Lord. And so so the initiative system I use is a iteration of that. And then it's just got, the things that I think are cool about those games in it. And over the test of time, I think I'm mostly right. But, also the great thing about role-playing games is it can be a lot of things to a lot of people. So I hope at the very least the people I've play tested it for at various conventions for the past 8 years have, like, more often than not, people are like, when is this coming out? And I'm like, well, when I'm done with it. Because, I work on deadlines for everything else. This is the thing, but it's in layout right now. Given personal things, I can get the first book out by this year. And unless, I get hit by a bus or whatever. So,
the metaphorical bus.
The metaphorical bus.
Yes. Well, so folks can go to delve-rpg.com if they want to stay on top of that as it develops.
Yeah, although that website is woefully out of date. It's one of my goals is to ramp that back up. But there's enough background material that you can see sort of what's going to be in the game and the head process throughout development. It's one of those things where I wanted to sort of, put things up there, even though I may come up with a better iteration down the line. It's all like, well, this is where it came from. This was the initial goal.
Right. Hello, Linnea. Oh, and as Linnea points out, I'm terrible about this whole marketing myself. Hey, if you're watching and enjoying it, whatever platform you're on, give me a thumbs up, give me a like, give me a heart, whatever the thing is. I'd love to have it. Thank you for reminding me, Linnea.
To answer Michael's question, you just have scores. You add scores to dice. I don't know numbers meaning other. It's just silly. I understand why D&D has it, but even rolling abilities. So, like, don't get me started on rolling ability scores. I'll be here all night.
You know what? I think it's interesting to me that part of the artifice of rolling an ability score to get a secondary number is that it makes character creation feel more robust. I don't know that it really makes it any more robust, but it makes it feel more robust.
Right. Yeah, I think mostly. I think mostly when we were kids, it seems somehow real, and then you're like, well, it's fantasy. I don't know how real I want this to be, and in the story that I always tell, it's. So I'm playing this after the guys at Paizo. Jason Blumen's running an Eberron game. He starts this Eberron game, and he goes, and Jason worked with me on the Living Greyhawk campaign. He was one of my circle members, and then he got hired by Paizo to do the magazines. And then he's like, "We're going to roll ability scores, Steven." And I'm like, "Why are we rolling ability scores?" And he goes, "Because I think it's cool." And I'm like, "Okay." So I roll hot. I roll like 2 18s and a 17, and mix all the numbers. And he goes, "Well, you got to get rid of one of those 18s." And I'm like, "Why?" And he goes, "That's just too good." And I'm like, "You were the one who wanted to roll ability scores." And then he pumped up some other person's thing. And I'm like, at this point, why aren't you just using point buy? You've already got this kind of spread that you want the characters to be. Just make that be a designer, dude. Don't, well, the dice made me do it. Like, shut up. You're not doing your job.
I'd love, yeah. It's randomization can bite you coming and going.
Yeah, you know, it's opposed roles is another thing. Oh, let's add random to random. This will be fun, right? It's like, no, just give them a DC. Just be done with it.
Yeah, I struggle with that kind of thing too. And the other thing, switching games entirely. One of the things that has driven me crazy for years, it, in Call of Cthulhu, to mention Cthulhu earlier,
Mhm.
is the it are the designers who design situations where failing will end the adventure, and it happens
Yeah,
in D&D too, right? And to the point that Robin Laws and Ken Hite felt they had to go make a whole new game to save it from that. When the real answer is design adventures so that failure doesn't mean that you can't do the thing you need to do. So that failure means
right.
something else. Right? You can work that into any time that you're saying roll your dice. You're also telling what the results of the different things are. So don't make it if so your target number is 18. If you roll a 7, it doesn't mean you fail. It means you get this other lesser result.
Well, I mean, I don't think we really, as a society, I don't think we really had a concept of failing forward until the Clinton administration.
Oh boy.
But yeah, no, failing forward. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
especially Call of Cthulhu is kind of the opposite of D&D. It's sort of the Elric of D&D's Conan, where you're supposed to lose, and
That's
so you've got to just make it as fun as possible. And
right.
so die roll means end of game. No, you've got to find situations where people are just about committing suicide to get out of the damn thing, because that's the fun of them. Like, how can I go out in the biggest blaze of glory? Paranoia is a bit like that too,
Yeah.
but then you just come back and whatnot. So
All right, so we're rolling on a little over the hour. The whole the whole starting point of this series of conversations was the 25th anniversary, or the 50th anniversary, 25th anniversary, 50th anniversary of the game, and
50th
of
anniversary.
role playing, all of role playing, right?
Yeah,
So here we are. We talked a lot about just different takes on what you can do, ways to play the game, things you can think about as a designer. And you've got a new game that you're putting together. What do
yeah.
you uh, what do you think the growth areas going forward beyond 50 are?
Um, Interestingly enough, I think, at least, and we've seen this before in the past of tabletop role playing game history. I think it's really going to start, in some ways, to come out of the hands of D&D and Wizard of the Coast.
Hmm.
Um, Not only is the OGL thing and various other things that Wizards has done as a company have sort of made people go, I think it's emboldened them to sit there and go, well, I want to try my hand at creating something
Hmm.
here, right? And so, and not only is it because it gives you a great degree of flexibility and freedom, because you know, base, when a corporation sits there and goes, "Hey, we might take back our toys," that makes you go, well, I want the toys to be my toys. And
Right.
so, through what Matt Mercer and company is doing, and Matt Coville and,
Heard
and,
anyone
and folks are doing, just about
never
anybody.
say I
And
never
so,
heard anyone have a spoonerism for Matt Mercer be mass murder. That was an interesting one there.
but Matt Mercer and his mass murderers. Uh, but yeah, I think, which of course really plays into my hand, because it's a wonderful time in such a cluttered market to put out a new RPG. Whoops. Um, But yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of creativity. I
Yeah,
think we're going to see a lot of people who are just going to try new things. I think that is actually, it may not be good for the business, but it's going to be excellent for the players and the hobby. And then what comes out of that is anybody's guess.
right.
I don't think it means people stop playing D&D. I think it just means what D&D means to people is going to take a shift in the way that it's taken a shift in the past before, right? I mean, it's gone a little bit from a more sort of thespian approach to a more war game and simulationist approach all of the time.
Right.
Third edition was a very much, we're going back to the dungeon. It's going to be very tactical, blah, blah, blah. All of this sort of whatever freaky character with whatever kit you played in second edition. We're going to make prestige classes, so you got to wait for that, right? And then fifth edition is kind of this nice sort of, you can do anything you want, sort of, but not really, which I think was exactly right for the time. But I don't know what. Yeah, the real thing is I don't know what we're going to see. I think we're going to see a lot of exciting, fun things, and a lot of sort of people trying things and failing and then retrying. Both of which I think are good for the art and the discipline of these type of games, but
Right.
maybe not as good for folks who want it to be big business.
So one of the
That's
things
my guess.
that sounds a good guess. One of the things that what you just said puts me in mind of. I remember at several junctures in the last 20 years where editions or half editions were happening. I I would get into my head that it's okay to let one player bring a third edition character and one player bring a 3.5 character and let them play this, or a fourth edition or a Pathfinder. You know, it, there is there's a conceptual Rosetta Stone that if you're a complete fly on by the seat of your pants CM, you can just do it.
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
but anyone who worries about how to get the numbers right can't. But if you just want to, you know, play around with it, just you can let people play the thing they want to play, and everyone, because of the storytelling aspect, you can all still sit around the table and play together.
yeah. I mean, it, yeah. Numbers foul that up a little bit. Just because numbers are so entrenched in us, rightly and wrong, mostly rightly, but somewhat wrongly, as they are the measure of reality. And
Right,
so it's all like you're not being right if you're just ignoring the numbers. And the fact of the matter is, what D&D really is uses math rocks to do the things that we were all doing when we were kids
right,
to solve the arguments that we had when we were kids. I hit you, no, you didn't. Right? It's like the math rock said I hit, and
yeah.
it's all like, oh, okay. Um,
The Mad
and
Rock.
so yeah, the changes, the change. The real funny thing about it is as much as people like to talk about the changes in the game through, over the years, the real changes are the underlying math of the game. Those are the things that have had the most drastic
Right,
changes. Um, Interestingly enough, the changes weren't as drastic between third and fourth, which was weird. Uh, they were pretty drastic with fifth, but yeah, once that layer changes, that's an addition in a lot of people's mind, and these paths will not cross. But the stories are constantly crossing. This one project that I'm working on with Luke Gygax, Melf's Guide to Live in Greyhawk, which is sort of, I'm writing the adventure for it. Luke's take on what goes on, after his father leaves Greyhawk, and
mm,
and of course focusing on his character. It's been a hell of a lot of fun to go back to those early days of Greyhawk and
right.
realizing, yeah, this story's not really changing that much. There's just the math rocks.
I think I'm going to be using the word math rocks a lot in the future.
Right.
Get past math rock.
Great term. I wish I coined it. I did not. I don't know who did, but the first time I heard it, I'm like, yep, that's what they are. They're math rocks.
All right. Well, Stephen, we got up here that delve-rpg.com. Folks can go there. As you say, it's not completely up to date, but that's where info on what you're doing will show up
Yep.
as you do it. And meanwhile, Stephen, I want to thank you again for showing up and having this conversation. I had a great time. And
Oh yeah.
like I say, I would love to put together some conversations where we can get a few like-minded individuals or people that were there at the same time to kind of hash out some of these specific eras that we talk about in general.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. Although I wouldn't say we bickered. Like Rob Heinzo and I used to. I'd always have to bring him in. Like, Rob, come to the meeting with me. Explain this. Like I love Rob. He's one of the most creative guys in the industry. And then sometimes he gets a little bit too creative for my taste, and I have to go, Rob, come here.
Well, I want to see that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Hold on a second. I'm going to take you off screen and do an outro, and then you and I can make our goodbyes.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. So that was my conversation with Stephen Radney-MacFarland. So much fun. It's a fun guy to talk to. I hope I can get him back for some more of that. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you everyone who was here live, and if you're watching on replay, well, thank you too. And as Linnea reminded me earlier, it would be great if you're watching to give this a thumbs up. There's a reason everyone who has a podcast says that. Is that it's literally is it's helpful to us. It helps to promote the show. I'm not making any money. This is not a sponsored show, but it helps to promote it in that the show will get recommended to more people. You giving it a thumbs up or a like or leaving a comment. Leave a comment. That'd be good. You doing that really does have an impact on the number of times it'll show up and be offered to other people who might enjoy it too. And we want to get more people in having fun with us. So please do that. Drop me a line if you want. Remember, if you sign up for our free newsletter at 50yearsinthedungeon.substack.com, you will be the first person or among the first people to see the finished piece of art that I was working on for this show and all the other shows. And you'll get all the information about upcoming stuff and what's going on. So please join us over there. 50yearsinthedungeon.substack.com. I will be back next week. Off the top of my head, I do not remember who I will be chatting to, but I'm pretty sure it'll be someone fun. So check it out and join us. I'd really appreciate it. And I'll be back tomorrow night with an episode of Random Encounters, my improv cartooning show that I do most Thursday nights live. So join me for that, if you will. Till then, everyone, take care.